Aircraft materials, processes, and hardware, threaded fasteners. Upon completion of today's lesson, we should be able to identify the different types of aircraft bolts, identify the different types of aircraft nuts, identify the different types of aircraft washers, and then describe some key practices for installing nuts, bolts, and washers. Threaded fasteners. A fastener provides the required security or attachment of aircraft parts, things that are going to be taken off and put back on at frequent intervals. If you're going to install something and never have to remove it again, then a rivet might be the way to go. But if you're going to install something that has to be taken off and put on and taken off, then we're going to want to use bolts or fasteners. Bolts are going to be used where great strength is required. Screws, on the other hand, are used when strength is not a deciding factor. Things like aircraft panels might be held on with a screw, but a landing gear would probably be held on with a bolt. Bolts have threads and are going to be classified by one of four thread series. The NC, which is National Coarse, the NF, which is National Fine, the UNC, which is the American Standard Unified Coarse, and UNF, American Standard Unified Fine. Threads are designed by a class fit, not only the whether they're coarse or fine, but also a class fit, which is going to be one which is going to be loose, like a wing nut. If you take and put a wing nut on a bolt and snap it with your finger, you're actually going to have that wing nut is just going to go right straight down the threads. Being class 5, being the tightest, is going to be so tight you're actually going to have to get a wrench to turn it by hand. Most aircraft bolts are going to have a class fit of about 3, which is classified as a medium fit. Screws are going to be a class 1 or a class 2 fit. They're going to be free turning. Most commonly used bolts in aircraft are going to be general purpose, AN, which is Air Force Navy, NAS, which is National Aerospace, which is an internal wrenching type bolt, and the MS, military standard bolts. Special bolts used are going to include a clevis bolt, an eye bolt, a jaw bolt, and a lock bolt. Bolts are typically identified by the codes or the markings on the head of the bolt. And each type of bolt serves a purpose, and unless specified otherwise, should be replaced with the exact matching bolt during the maintenance process. Non-self-locking nuts. These are nuts that must be safetied by some type of external locking device, possibly a cotter pin or a safety wire or a jam nut or possibly even a lock washer. Some examples of non-self-locking nuts would be a plain nut or a castle nut or castellated shear nut, a plain hex nut, or check nut. Self-locking nuts are going to contain the locking features actually built right in as part of the bolt. As you can see, we have a boot type self-locking nut or a stainless steel type self-locking nut. We also have an elastic type self-locking nut. Realize the elastic self-locking nuts are a low temperature nut and are restricted to below 250 degrees. You would not want to use a self-locking nut on any joint which has a rotation. This rotation could cause the nut to actually back off. So in an area where we have rotation, we would want to use something more lines of either a safety wire or a cotter pin is probably the desired locking device. There are different types of washers, 3 types of washers. We have a plain washer, a lock washer, or a special type washer. And you can notice the lock washers come in a split washer, an internal or an external star washer. Some of the special washers might have a countersink or a taper on them to handle high-stress steel bolts. There are some key practices to follow when installing bolts, nuts, and washers. The bolt should be installed with the head on the top or in the forward position. When the head is on the top, gravity holds it in place. When the head is in the forward position, the wind actually holds it in place. Should something happen to the nut and it comes off. The grip length should be equal to the length of the material being bolted together. What is the grip length? That's the unthreaded portion of the bolt. You should know the torque value for the nuts and the bolts that you're installing, because remember, every piece of hardware that gets installed on an aircraft has a torque, and we need to follow that. Threaded fasteners provide the required security of attachment and rigidity on aircraft parts that must be taken apart and put back together at frequent intervals. The threads are going to be classified by one of 4 thread series as well as the class of fit. Typically, aircraft hardware is going to be a class fit of about a 3. Screws are going to be a 1 or a 2. There are general and specific or special purpose bolts used in aircraft construction. A bolt is going to serve a specific purpose in aircraft construction, and replacements should be an exact match to what the parts manual says, not what you pulled out of the aircraft, because you don't know who put the one in before you. You can only assume it was the right bolt, so always refer to the parts manual when installing a bolt. There are 2 types of nuts used on aircraft: non-self-locking and self-locking. There are 3 types of washers: plain, lock, and special. When installing bolts, nuts, and washers, always follow the manufacturer's guidelines. Know the torque value and make sure that all your hardware is properly torqued and secured.